welcome back to a special solo episode of Squawking Dead. It's me, Dave, your solitary host for the evening. If you've been paying attention to the last few episodes of Squawking Dead, it's clear that Carol's interest in Fear the Walking Dead has waned the closer we get to The Walking Dead airing, to the point where we both agreed that if she couldn't even spend the energy to take some muster righteous burn against it, then she might as well use the extra time to spend bringing home the bacon, or channel that energy she would normally use for the show towards spending time with her family, or with her kids and stuff like that. And it's October, it's Halloween season, and for parents and small children, it's kind of bigger than Christmas, right? So what I'd like you to try to do with this episode, depending on how it goes, is give you a chance to get your headsets ready, because if the banter's good enough, I'll send you a link to join me on the podcast. We're almost a year into Squawking Dead, and we're extremely open to new ideas, even having guest hosts on, and you never know, something like this might lead. So perhaps a co-hosting in all future episodes of Fear the Walking Dead is in your future. Change of career opportunity for you. It's also our last podcast before we go full throttle into The Walking Dead Season 9. So it's our 30th episode. The 31st will be our The Walking Dead Season 9 episode. And a little bit of housekeeping is kind of like in order. Basically, for those of you who've been watching Fear the Walking Dead, it's a perfect opportunity to kind of go through the season, match it up with the season finale, basically take stock of the entire season. And it's probably a good way to kind of just close it, bookend it really nicely before we move on to The Walking Dead. So while you're dusting off your headsets, take a minute to like, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications, and follow us so you're always on top of any news, blog posts, and overall fun stuff. Did that sound too advertising? Yeah, that's what happens. But yeah, so just so you know, we don't really like post a lot of stuff on Instagram that often, or Facebook, or even the Twitters. It's kind of like a couple times a week, usually on average, and really just to kind of get the word out on the next podcast, or when it goes out on Apple, Google Play Music, and SoundCloud and all that stuff. But obviously, if you do subscribe, if you do like, and if you do follow us on Instagram, at least you do get notifications when we go live. So that's kind of brilliant. And as a result, you kind of get a notification when we pop on. You'll also get notifications when a new, an edited podcast goes up and stuff like that. It's mostly just for that. So. We start off the episode with Althea basically trying to escape the hospital. It seems like she was hiding out at a post office, and she's just trying to figure out where the gang went, and because she lost battery on her walkie. And lo and behold, we find Martha. Oh man, my notes are out of order. This is what you get when you do note-taking late at night the night before, and I have to tell you, I've just way too many notes. It's a point of criticism that anybody could really have with me, and let's bring that up here. Yeah, okay. Now, she heads back to the hospital after hiding at the post office, and the first thing she encounters, has no idea what's been going on this whole time, doesn't know about the crisis on the roof, doesn't know what it took to get them to escape, all that stuff. The cheerful, cheesy kind of return to pick up Morgan, all of that stuff is lost now, Althea, and what we've got basically an Althea that knows nothing, runs back to the hospital. One thing about Althea that I'll say is that she's kind of like an inspiration in a weird way. She basically is kind of like the biggest badass on the show aside from Morgan, if you really think about it. I mean, both people are kind of like outsiders if you really kind of take stock on what their moves have been. Althea's kind of more with it. I think she's when you really kind of take stock of Althea herself, is she was used to living in a war zone, or living in war zones, kind of living on her own, never really making any attachments, and she was like that before and after the apocalypse. So when you break it down, you see that she's a badass bitch. And Morgan, I don't know what life was like for him before the apocalypse, but he had his kid, he had his wife, and Althea's in it to win it. Now I think both the people I'm talking about, as a result of what they've been through, Althea throughout her life, she's gotten used to it, and Morgan, he's been getting used to it. It's kind of like a recipe, because you have a situation situation where, like, what does it take for somebody on the outside to come back to the inside and realize that they've been missing out on people? And Morgan's kind of, getting used to it, but Althea actually, when we really kind of get down to it, she's used to people, so she can interact with them, but she's not really used to being around people or like being a part of people. So it's kind of one thing I noticed when I watched the episode for a third time and started doing notes last night, and it's something to kind of take into stock as you go through the episode, because it's kind of important, because the two people that stand out the most in this episode are going to be Althea and Morgan, because these two people kind of exemplify the two last people to kind of really speak their truth unnecessarily. Althea never really gets a chance to speak it out loud, kind of like everybody else, the things she advocates throughout the season. However, she does go through something, and you do kind of notice it in the show. It's very subtle. It's not even mentioned in Talking Dead, but you do see like signs of basically the writers basically trying to show that she's an outsider, show that she's like not really a part of the group. So the first thing she sees when she heads to the hospital and turns around with her shotgun is Walker Jim. Again, not knowing where anybody is, what anybody's doing, that's the first thing she sees is Walker Jim. Now, she didn't expect it. She didn't know he was even bitten. But there he is, rocky like a hurricane, and she's kind of confronted with that and Martha at the same time. But she kind of quickly snaps into it, and she's basically not about to do Martha's bidding, as Martha wants to leave Morgan a message. But the interesting interaction that you have with Martha and Althea is that she recognizes the things that I'm kind of saying about Althea in this episode, is that she is an outsider, but she doesn't need help. She can carry her own. She knows what she's doing. She must have watched all the tapes, and she gets the idea that Althea can take care of herself. She was able to take care of herself right from the beginning, before the apocalypse. She's never needed help. And really, if you do go by the tapes and not by real life interactions from this entire season, you would get the picture that Martha's painting about Althea, that she's self-involved, that she really does anything that she needs to do around her subjects to do what she needs for herself, and doesn't really rely at all from the tapes, just reviewing those, on others to carry her own. She has her van, she has her wits, she has her skills, she has those fist daggers that she has, and she's able to take care of herself. And you could easily take that scene on its own and say, why would Martha, why would she spare Althea? But if you really think about it, crazy people got their own rules. So I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to take it on gospel that this is what's going on and this is what it's all about. But, you kind of got to give crazy some credence at the same time. And part of that is really kind of analyzing the situation. It's kind of like laying out Althea's life according to the tapes, which is basically Martha's entire perspective. And again, she's an educator. She'll pick up on things, so when she sees a subject and she has to basically teach it, I think she has a good read on people, try to assess people. I think that's what she's been doing since the beginning of the apocalypse. And it's kind of what we do see when she reveals a little bit of her life making people stronger. And it's that we had the impression that maybe the stuff that was going on with her and her husband Hank on the side of the road at mile marker 54 was already in medias res of the apocalypse. But it happens to be that when we cut away to the walker she had killed way down when Stevie the trucker was leaving the box, apparently she'd been out there for a really long time, which kind of furthers my theory of what I wish they had done with Martha's character to kind of tie the entire season together, is that I kind of wished that Martha was responsible. And I mentioned this in the podcast last week, but since I have a little bit more of an audience, I kind of want to mention it today. I kind of wish they spent a little bit more time. First of all, this is something Carol had said, and I absolutely agree, is that I wish they'd spent more time fleshing out the period of time between Martha losing Hank and Martha meeting Stevie the trucker, because if that was the time period between her falling into madness and then all the way, or who knows when Stevie the trucker came around and started, happened to drop off that box on mile marker 54. The thing about that is that we really don't know. We don't know if this is in the beginning. All we know is that it was the time it took for a walker body to go absolutely dead, or absolutely like bone. bones almost. And who knows how long that was at the oh, thanks, Sean. Hey, nice call, buddy. That's Nashville Negan, everybody. And so yeah, so that's the thing about that. So the one thing that I kind of wanted them to kind of utilize is maybe just a time anchoring device, possibly, is having Martha actually having started the fire that took out Mel and Ennis's farm, their family farm. I mean, you kind of expected it to be Ennis and Mel that had started the fire. We all had that suspicion, kind of like going into it. Oh, a typical like horror scenario. You have the two boys, one of them's a bad boy and started the fire, but nothing really came of that. And having Martha start the fire kind of links up everything. I mean, it makes her responsible for everything. It ups the stakes to an absurd degree. And, you know, if you'd fleshed that out right, you could have made this villain a lot more formidable, challenge the idea of the kind of person that could be saved, and maybe Morgan would still go after her. You never know. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, maybe they didn't want to take the risk. Maybe they didn't want to go too big. I mean, Martha's already stretched being as crazy as she is. But given the fact that, you know, we don't really know what led to the way she kind of ended up. Really, not really. I mean, you kind of got the sense of it, but it's not enough time passing. So, yeah, so we see Althea escape, basically, and of all things that she ends up finding, oh, actually, you know what? I was right the first time. Althea's escape was right from the beginning. She ends up finding the news van with the camera, of all things, and yeah, and before Martha basically passes out from Martha's blow with her bow staff, Martha, you basically get the sense that you know, she's almost done for, but you know, when she wakes up in June in John's van, you kind of like she even got the impression that, oh, psychopath bitch basically likes me, so what does that say about me? And that's kind of like what I was saying before. I think all of this starts to plant a seed in Althea about how, I mean, her interaction with Martha is kind of like a seed that gets planted in Althea. Not just Althea, but us, but mostly Althea, about how the rest of the world views her as an outsider. I mean, she gets what she wants, goes off into her corner, and she realized that perhaps like Morgan, that she needs to be with people. We never see that more than when she rewatches the tapes, just like June did to John, realizing that she could have connected more with her subjects. And you do see this at the end of the episode, that she's doing anything to connect with somebody. And you also kind of get the sense, you know, obviously we had that interaction between her and June, but you get the impression that yes, she had people she cared about, but really, when you think about it, did she really interact with her subjects? I mean, I think in her own weird way, she cared for them, and maybe she kind of protected them the way off camera, obviously, the way she does with this group. But in as much as, you know, they're a subject, I think maybe being with our group right now was probably the only time she had really bothered, getting more involved. Like, after all, when they were trying to finish off the vultures, you know, you have people calling her out. You know, she doesn't want to get involved. She doesn't want to get involved with the subject. It's like, you know, if you help us out, you know, you can get more of the story. You know, we can continue on with the rest of the story. And I mean, there's a little bit of manipulation there, but at the same time, she's getting involved. It's not just about, it's not only about the story at a certain point. It can't be. I mean, she has layers after all. But yeah, another thing to notice aside from the camera that she happens to pick up, the one thing that happens to be in this parking garage, is that the very car she ends up using to get to Martha uses, and it's a police car, the quintessential, what we classically normally think of as help. You know, you call for help, you call the police, right? So I thought that was kind of an interesting choice to use. I mean, obviously there are lots of police cars in the apocalypse, but in a hospital parking garage. But the idea of Althea taking it to around where the hospital is, Martha taking that cruiser from her, Martha takes that all the way to mile marker 54, and by the time she meets up with Morgan takes the same cop car. It's the same usage of the police cruiser all throughout the episode, practically, until it really couldn't be used anymore. I mean, there's a lot of poetic license being thrown around when help is being the vehicle for help is being used to, you know, cruise around the entire episode by an outsider sandwich. I mean, Martha, Althea, and Morgan. So that it's really kind of interesting to see the different ways that they use it. And by the end of it, you know, when Morgan is basically using basically has Martha in tow, and that vehicle for help gets trashed. I mean, this is basically Martha's ultimate plan. I mean, it's useless now, and it kind of solidifies the point that there's a lot of foreshadowing in this episode when it comes to this the way it was going to end up going down with Martha. it was never going to go the way that she had planned it. And I think we all kind of, well, I think most of us probably knew that. I think Morgan was going to have to make a choice at some point, and maybe it wasn't quite the way we thought it would be. But I think in our heart of hearts, there being a season 5, I mean, if Morgan was going to go out the way he was going to go out, I mean, let's say Morgan dies or had died, the way it goes down, the way it would have gone down would probably be in a way that he at least found some sort of peace, because I don't think that would sit well with viewers much at all. So yeah, I mean, one way or the other, it wasn't going to go the way Martha planned, because I don't think that sends the right message about the apocalypse. I mean, especially going into what's going to end up being a really complex The Walking Dead season 9. So, that's just the way I feel about it. So everybody's kind of like gathered around in this kind of tree growth in the middle of a field at night in the dark around a fire. And Morgan's kind of describing Alexandria and basically how things are going to end up going for the next 12, how things are going to move forward, how they're going to get to Alexandria, what they're going to do. And he mentions that the first thing that he wants to do, because he does want to continue doing the care boxes, is head over to the Polar Bears truck stop in Mississippi, the flip-flop truck stop, and he wants to continue leaving care boxes all the way down to towards Alexandria. And in the process of kind of settling things over, Morgan decides to take the night shift so that so that basically he can do his own thing afterwards. And John kind of picks up on his attitude right away. He knows he's being squirrely, and he kind of meets him in the middle of the night. And what's really interesting about that scene is, first of all, hats off to Adam Sushitsky, because the guy knows how to cinematically paint a scene. As John is kind of standing facing Morgan, Morgan's basically squatting and playing with his bow staff and the ground, kind of like a child almost, like, I'll do it myself. I mean, literally, if I was a religious man, I'd say, God bless John, because the way the rays of light kind of shoot through the trees, the moonlight kind of shoots through the trees and bathes John with this kind of really cool glow and everything. It's just such a really perfectly framed shot, and it was just worth noting, because it's just kind of beautiful, and it kind of paints John as this, obviously, the way cinema works is that it's not enough to have the lines and have the look and have the convincing stare, but sometimes scene painting just goes a long way. And what John is kind of really convey is, we've been through this before. He's willing to go through these kind of motions with Morgan over and over again to kind of just show everybody how loyal a person he is. Now, what he doesn't do is try to disrespect Morgan. He doesn't try to go past his charge, basically. He doesn't try to shoot above his head and try to make him do things. It's kind of like, think of the differences between the way the cast of The Walking Dead acts towards people versus the way, and especially Morgan, versus the way this Fear the Walking Dead crew reacts towards Morgan. They kind of hold him in a higher regard. They respect his decisions. They'll challenge him, but they're really appreciative and really loyal to him as well. And the one thing that shouldn't go past anybody's notice is how respectful they are of his decisions, no matter how much they want to challenge him. And you could regard their standoffishness as a sort of, he's an outsider, I shouldn't expect too much from him. You could do that. You could get away with that. But I think there's a tremendous amount of respect for Morgan. The way he's managed to kind of weave his way into people's hearts, and do incredible things for them. Like the thing that he did with Alicia at the stadium, basically preventing her from getting June in the end. Her quest for vengeance to kind of kill everybody, the Vultures and June and Charlie probably. But that's the thing, like with doing so little, and in subtle ways and in huge ways, Morgan took some interesting at-bats with the group, and his batting average is really high, and people do respect that. And especially the kind of friendship that he's developed with John, it's kind of afforded John a little bit more leeway. He feels like he could speak up more, and he does speak up. And he wants to let Morgan know that we've been through this before. You went at it alone. You almost got yourself killed. And even though he goes through the motions, giving him solid reasonings why he shouldn't do it, he recognizes something with Morgan. And he says, and he knows that he has to do this sort of thing alone. He knows that there's a part of him that's kind of stuck, and he needs to get himself unstuck, and of all people to kind of understand that, John would. John understands what it means to kind of sequester yourself for the sake of trying to, not really hurt anybody else, or to really sequester himself to kind of, be a protector in his own way by protecting other people from him. So when it comes down to it, he gets it. John basically says, it comes down to kind of like saying, there's some fish you just have to leave be, and that's adorable. And the bottom line, in the process of appealing to him, he says, you might as well be the fish, and says the fish that, basically Martha's got the pull, and that Morgan fish is tasty. And basically, the one thing that's really not obvious that I want to make obvious as a result of this conversation is that despite going through all emotions, despite not despite but kind of in spite of the respect they kind of have with each other, they the one thing that really, the real takeaway from this conversation is that as opposed to Morgan, basically there's a lot of comparisons to the way Morgan reacted to Henry back in The Walking Dead season 8. The idea that he might have turned when he ran away and when he let all those people out of the pen and he almost got trampled and run over. Henry did not want to know Morgan did not want to know Henry's fate. I bring this up a lot during the season, and it makes sense because Morgan was so warped about the idea of finding Henry as a walker. He didn't want to find out if he was dead or alive. So he kind of just made up any excuse to not have to look for him. And the one takeaway to kind of really bring it home how adjusted John is that no matter what, he wants to know what happens to Morgan, because the thing is that they're all going to meet at Polar Bear's truck stop, and what he says is that we're going to wait 48 hours. If you're not there in 48 hours, I'm going to come looking for you. I ain't going anywhere without you. And the most important takeaway from all this is that in spite of how he might find Morgan, he's going to find him either dead or alive, but he's going to find him. And I thought that was kind of important too. It kind of shows the lengths to which people care about him, the right way to do things. Carol tried to show that to him as well, and she tried to express that too. And seeing Henry alive does kind of change Morgan in a way, because we don't see like a killbot Morgan as a result of that conversation with Carol. So I think that does change things a little bit. Okay, so yeah, he's on his way to meet Martha and Mindy. And again, bring up the idea of the fork in the road, that T in the road where he can go left or right. And Martha says she's at mile marker 54, basically where it all began. It kind of represents the kind of choices that Morgan has, and he ends up meeting her there. But let's take a stop at the flip-flop truck stop. The one thing to notice also, planting a seed of, everybody's trying to recharge the batteries, their proverbial batteries. Charlie's brushing her teeth, and something to note is that, yes, everybody's kind of trying to do their own thing, but Althea's kind of still hustling. She's on her own, loading up the guns and ammo and, her turret guns. And again, she's kind of doing her own thing. And what's interesting about that is that the guys at the truck stop, as they're trying to recharge, you got Luciana, Strand, and Alicia. They're all looking at Polar Bear's map, and they're already kind of discussing maybe not going to Alexandria. They're kind of trying to find reasons to maybe stay, find a new reason to live that doesn't involve having to take that long trip. And I thought that was kind of an interesting scene to kind of put in. Like, I guess they're trying to say, maybe we're not ready to let go. Maybe we're not ready to kind of give up on this place. But the more they think about it, and throughout the season, they've been like dropping seeds and hints that, even from the second episode, I have to say, or was it first episode? Yeah, I think it might have been the first one. With Leland and the Pilferers, basically, where Morgan basically, as John said, almost got himself killed. You start to understand that there's nothing out there. Things are dire. The vultures did not make things any better. So any people that are left around, they're probably scattered and holed up. All the other people are either corralled up walkers with numbers on them, indicating how many there are. There are people in sparse locations. There's not enough food everywhere. Things are running out. Even on The Walking Dead, they're making note that things are running out. They cannot, the things that are stocked up in unperishables, they're running out. Food is obviously rotten, and people can't live like that too. You got to sort of start making things. You got to start growing things too. And so even in the Walking Dead universe, this is happening. And so with Texas, their region in Texas, it's kind of like, and Texas is a huge ass state, the Lone Star State. You start to understand that resources are finite and there's barely anyone out there. Texas got hit, so it's just not good. And after the hurricane, it's even worse, because now you've got things scattered all over the place. You got people who don't have, if people haven't already died from all of this, whatever they've got, crops, whatnot, they're gone. Their house is practically gone. Yeah, there's really nothing out there already. And with the hurricane, everything is kind of more, there's less of whatever there wasn't out there now. And they kind of re-established that. They kind of established that at the end of the last episode with John Dorie saying there's really nothing out there. And obviously they can't stay in Austin because it's overrun. So all roads kind of pointed to Alexandria, and I think they were just trying to find one more reason to stay. Okay, so I kind of wanted to review this one. This episode can't go on without taking a small look, at least, at the John and June scene. I mean, aside from the other part, the first part I kind of have to get over with is that the interaction that they try to have, that June tries to have, basically letting him know that, I needed to let you know that I figured out who I am, and it was no small part to you. I was having a hard time already trying to reconcile the person I became with the person I know myself to be, basically. And I think the things that we mentioned in previous episodes, trying on John Dorie's boots, Madison's jacket, the idea that she can incorporate some of these things in her life, and maybe these are things that she maybe always had inside of her. I think it just takes a little courage to kind of put them on. And so when she confronts John, she's basically letting him know, I know you don't think, I know you know me, or at least, you have an idea of me, but I need you to know that I know me too, that I'm not going to be a problem with me. And so I think that's important in a relationship too, because it's one thing when you know somebody and you know their ins and outs and their quirks and what they're going to do and how they're going to feel about something and how they're going to react to any given situation. But I think it's also important, you can only do so much to, I guess, circumvent or, anticipate people's needs and reactions. But if the person you're with isn't really comfortable with themselves and isn't comfortable with all those things, it doesn't really matter what you do. It kind of matters where you are in life and being comfortable in your own skin and having the wherewithal to basically move on from where you are to be something more. And so June recognizing that means that she can actually lean into what she's got with John, and there's nothing holding her back. And then, of course, the line, I know you. Doesn't matter what your name is. It doesn't take a whole day to recognize sunshine. And oh my God, everybody just had a heart attack. Their heart skipped a beat, and then they realized, oh, it's not there anymore because John Dorie melted my heart. It's times like these, I'm so glad that my wife does not like Fear the Walking Dead or The Walking Dead or any horror show whatsoever, because I'd have a hard time trying to hold on to that one. Until tomorrow, obviously. I mean, she already liked Garrett Dillahunt from Raising Hope, so there's that. I'm like, what, Jim, what? Okay, no, Morgan is finally at mile marker 54, and the first thing he notices is the police cruiser with Jim in the back seat. Perfect place for a walker, or anything that might harm you. So basically, yeah, it's continuing the theme of this police cruiser changing hands. And thank goodness for Morgan, because he ends Walker Jim. And I think Aaron Stanford could really stand to not be in that makeup and contact lens kit. He's been through enough. Being on the ledge almost... looking at him on that ledge kind of made me kind of exhausted. So with that, goodbye, Aaron Stanford. And the first thing Morgan sees off in the business, the business? He sees Martha's business. What? He basically sees Martha off in the distance in the field where she buried her husband, and she sees her face. He sees her face down. Now, I didn't kind of really gather what she was trying to do in the beginning, because I kind of just, crazy is crazy. You can't try to explain it. But after actually looking at the behind the scenes photos that Tanya Pinkins actually posted, one of the things that they were doing, the props department was doing, was or the makeup department, they were actually squeezing on like maggots, like live maggots in her chest wound, indicating that what she was trying to do as Martha was keep her skin on the ground where her husband died, where they're eating her up, and trying to get the maggots to infest her skin on the chest. And when I found that out, that's like next level commitment. But obviously, by the end of the episode, you start to realize that, oh, it gets worse. All this into account. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, he basically drags Martha to the cop car to bring her back. We don't know at this point that she's too far gone. But back at the flip-flop, I can't say it with a straight face, the flip-flop truck stop. Can you do that 10 times fast anyway? So they're trying to actually reach Morgan in the cop car, and they can, but he can't reach them. And it's good to note that Sarah notices that right away. But she also makes a snide comment about the coffee sweetener that was put in the coffee. Meanwhile, yeah, antifreeze. And just as that's happening, you cut to Althea filling the MRAP with coolant, making a comment about Smiley running the car without it. So, but the one thing to kind of notice, that the more important important thing beside this is to kind of understand that she's, again, you have this scene with her and Strand is kind of like, stop dicking around and help us out with the boxes. Further exemplifying the idea that, you know, she's like not part of the gang, and like Strand seeing her is dicking around and not doing something useful. You know, meanwhile, she's been out at the truck the entire time, being apart from everybody, you know, filling up coolant, refilling the ammo to the guns, and basically, you know, let me just see something really quickly. Yeah, she's basically standing apart from everybody, and it's worth kind of noting again, just as Althea is kind of like dealing with Strand's comment, you get some walkers coming, and then you realize, or Althea slowly realizes that, like, you're looking at her and you're like, what's going on? Why can't she move her hand? What's the deal? And she basically is sick and needs assistance. And basically, you find out that everybody's getting sick, and it's not just her. Even though she was apart from everybody, she still drinks water. So back at the cruiser, Martha's kind of opening up as the flip-flop truck stop is getting overrun, and she tells Morgan about Hank being out there from the beginning, trying to get help after he got into the accident, and just, you know, to the point where she got clipped by a car. Nobody helping her. Nobody pulling over to even try. And, you know, Morgan tries to reason with her that him dying was not her fault. Her not being able to get help was not her fault. And, you know, people are people. You know, she could not even... There's just no way she could have helped him. And June kind of chimes in, and then Martha kind of knows what's going on. June basically tells Morgan about how sick they are, and the tension starts to ramp up, and then as Morgan steps on the gas, Martha realizes, oh, it's, you know, I gotta get him now or else he's not gonna, well, he's doing something crazy. So she decides to take the antibiotics, or wants to take the antibiotics, quote unquote, you know, refusing him the first time, kind of ignoring him, and in the process of him passing him off to her, she grabs his arm and they crash, thus ending the vessel for help. Now, Morgan's dilemma, as he's kind of coming to, Martha explains basically, you're going to be strong no matter what, one way or the other. And she, unlike the other people that she writes on, she writes in clear, plain text the words, I lose people, I lose myself, on his forehead, which is kind of interesting also. And kind of what I was mentioning before at the beginning of the show, there's a little bit of foreshadowing in what he's doing, because as she's doing it, you start to realize that the only people she's really drawn on the faces of people that she's just killed or have been killed, and it's in a style of kind of calligraphy, kind of telling you that Morgan is not going to be dying in the scenario, and that still doesn't mean that he's not going to do the other thing, which is kill her. Like, you don't know that for sure, but there is an indicator that she's not going down, or that that Morgan's at least not going to die. She's never put words on the faces of anybody who's still alive. So what she also reveals, though, is that she let Jim bite her. You get to see a little bit of that maggoty stuff that I was talking about before. Now, her logic is basically that he either has to kill her in order to get back to his friends, or not even. Like, he's just not going to get back to his friends in time after all of this, and he's going to have no choice but to kill her as a result of losing people. Or he waits for her to turn anyway, because he doesn't kill and stand by his principles, and he has to take the chance of getting killed, you know, death by walker. And so none of these are really good choices. Him being incapacitated, you know, he's got like a thing just in the side of his leg that's just, well, not rebar, but like a piece of the car basically embedded in deep within his leg. And so, I mean, that's where basically he's at. And oh yes, so another thing to notice about these scenes, just as he's coming to, you start to hear if you remember the scenes from Martha's origin, and as you go through the scenes with her and Hank, her post Hank, and then her burying him in the little scene of madness, all throughout these, you would hear a small clink. Kind of like a small tiny pipe, small tiny piece of metal clanging against like some pipe, and every now and again it would get more intense and more frequent as the tension started ratcheting up, and you start to hear it here as well, like indicating that, you know, maybe Morgan is, you know, under this tremendous tension. Maybe he is kind of in the Martha zone, basically where she was, you know, dealing with the enormous amount of stress of trying to keep these people alive and deal with the situation. The possibility that he loses either way, and then either way she wins, basically. Him killing her, she wins. Him waiting for her to turn and then kill her, she still wins, because then he waits that amount of time to take her out. So you hear it now, like clink, 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 clink. Anyway, so but all throughout this, Morgan is adamant that he's just here to help her, and I mean, in a way, you kind of believe that, even though there's a part of there's got to be a part of him that realizes, I need to face this thing head on. You know, I gotta end this once and for all. I gotta figure out how to move past this point. And throughout the scene, we flip back and forth. Also, we go to the flip flop truck stop, and then June starts to realize that all the caps, the water bottles, have been tampered with. And Martha also reveals that it was antifreeze, and that she basically poisoned all those bottles with antifreeze, and she has to and Morgan still can't communicate with her. And upon hearing this idea, you know, the what is ailing them, and the fact that he can't reach her, is he does his best to kind of make it clear that, you know, to everybody, to us, the audience, that this will not stand. Like he's not. First of all, there's a part of him that kind of is stuck in the moment, that he needs to kind of deal with this with her at this point. But he's prioritizing them. He is doing the impossible. He's finding out that there is something that he can do. Maybe they can actually find a way to cure them. And so whereas he felt incapacitated before, now he's kind of like doing the impossible. He's getting up, he's pulling the thing out of his leg, and he's doing something about it. And not only that, he's doing more than he thought he would with it. So when he gets up, he tries to choke her out. And she basically says, "Now you're strong." She basically says, "Now you're strong. I know it was still in you." And you see him flash to like all picturing all his friends dying at the truck stop. And it kind of resembles the Alicia's vision from Close Your Eyes, like the idea that, you know, she's trying to find ways, like they both were trying to find ways to end the other person. You know, Alicia with like a mercy killing at the very least, trying to find hate in her heart. And Morgan now really trying to conjure up images of the people that he's losing. And it almost works, if not for the fact that he looked in the mirror and he saw what was written on his forehead, and it scared the bejesus out of him. Yeah, and so, and he tries to find out how long it'll take for the poison to last. But then she says it doesn't really matter. There's nothing he can do. And it's like almost in spite of her. And you see this in earlier episodes as well, when he talks to her over the radio. Well, there was a couple episodes back. It's the same episode where I think June is with Althea, and Althea gets sick. Morgan is in the back of the truck on the radio, basically communicating with Martha, saying, you know, we're like after that communication, he's like, I'm gonna leave more boxes now. I'm gonna make it a point to actually leave more boxes. He kind of does the same thing here, where upon hearing those words, where there's nothing he can do, he makes sure he can do something. He gets up, and you know, he basically handcuffs her to the cop car, so that now that choice of her possibly killing somebody else after she's turned is removed from her. And he just basically decides, you know, I don't have to kill you, but I also don't have to let you hurt anybody else after you turn. You know, there's some things that I will not kill you, but I also want to live in a world where you can possibly hurt anybody else. And she just cries like a little baby. As he sets off on foot. Now, what's interesting about this entire situation that Morgan's in with Martha is that Martha, I think, in her own way, as an educator, let's say, basically her whole goal is to unstick Morgan, basically. They both are trying to unstuck each other. Morgan, you know, obviously with the no one's gone till they're gone kind of attitude, you know, no one's beyond help, that sort of thing. But Martha also with her own philosophy, the philosophy that Morgan gets, you know, kill or be killed, you know, you rise up against me, I'm gonna kill you twice as fast. And not only that, but being alone and just, you know, ending the helpers and people who think they can make a difference, that sort of thing. You know, there are certain dark parts of Morgan that Martha attempts to reach. Now, obviously, he's gone too far in this season to kind of really go back, but she can definitely screw a guy up. Obviously, she sees that on the videos. And also, this is at the beginning of the season too, when Morgan is the most vulnerable. When she kind of meets John and Althea, you know, on the road. I mean, he's kind of only just kind of coming out of this fog where he's starting to warm up to John and all that stuff, but we're not nearly there. And that's kind of the person that Martha thinks she's dealing with also. Same as Althea. She thinks she's dealing with, Martha thinks she's dealing with a person that just only does what she does for her subject, not really for herself. You know, she doesn't really try to get help from them. She doesn't get to know them. And that's the impression that is left from those tapes. And so it kind of gives you a bigger idea of how people must look at other people. Think about it this way. You're at a grocery store. Somebody in front of you is taking a long ass time. or somebody is dealing with a food stamp situation or a coupon situation, or somebody's doing something that just annoys the hell out of you. But when you really think about it and you go on like outside tells, you really don't know what's going on with that person on the inside. I mean, you don't know the kind of day they've had. You don't know their financial situation. You don't know the kind of life they have. And you get some of these cues from Martha. Martha is only looking at the surface of people. She doesn't know who they are really. She sees that, yeah, there are base parts of society. She's an educated woman. You know, she knows the drill. She knows how bad people can be. She's a teacher, for God's sake. She's taught tons of shitty kids. But at the end of the day, all Martha is really going on is surface cues. She's going on what people choose to show. She doesn't really go on what they have in their heart. She doesn't know what their whole story. She doesn't know why certain people couldn't pull over on the road to help her. I mean, and who can blame them also, if you really think about it? When things are going down, people are freaking out. You know, you got to give people leeway, but at the same time, you know, it produces this result. And we do see at the end of the episode that, you know, if we could have just helped people like that early on, we wouldn't have these situations where, you know, you'd have these dire situations where people start to turn into monsters. And so you really start to see, like, you know, that there is an interesting thing about that, and it's just really telling. And that's the interesting thing about Morgan, is that he's already got some of these attachments, and every time you really start to see like what it means to have a deeper connection, to know people. You know, when you have a connection to people, you get to start to know who they really are rather than what they are on the surface. And I think a lot of this season reflects that. I mean, the ability for Alicia to look past what Charlie's done and get to know who she is. Madison's unbelievable talent for tolerating even the most, you know, underhanded kinds of attacks, like Naomi, you know, June as Naomi, basically almost ending her, and I mean, being overall hostile even in the face of, you know, trying to give her the most leeway and being hospitable and trying to get her to join. There's tons of examples in this season where things could have gone sideways, but people moving beyond their perceptions, it not only reverses the situation, produces almost unbelievable possibilities. And you do see that from episodes past, where how did we get to a point where Alicia wanting to take Charlie to the beach gets Strand and Dorie saved, and all this stuff, and then Luciana saved because Morgan decided to write down the his radio channel on the boxes that he decided to start distributing with Wendell and Sarah. And this was as a result of Alicia leaving him in the midst of a hurricane. So everything that happens because people start to move beyond their expectations of other people. The surface expectations, Martha could not look past. And so when you see Morgan start to rally every time he hears from the group, or every time he almost thinks that they're already dead, and then somebody kind of chimes in, you see him rally again. You see him kind of just gather his strength. There's like more of a reason to live, and that's important too. And like, it's kind of like no one's gone till they're gone. And you know what? Morgan is thinking to himself at one point, the radio kind of conks out. Morgan doesn't know what's going on. And so that kind of brings me back to the Henry situation, the John and Morgan conversation from earlier, where John is basically saying to him, I don't know, you know, after 48 hours, if I don't hear from you, I'm coming after you. I don't know what state I'm going to find you in, but no matter what, I'm going to find out. And so that's Morgan by the end of this episode. And you start to understand that when you get to that point where Morgan is not even questioning, he doesn't even skip a beat, when he doesn't hesitate, and all he can think of is, I need to know what happened to this group no matter what. It's on me. If I can save them, that's great. I mean, before you might have been thinking as he was going on and stumbling and barely not able to get up, you were thinking he just needs to know that he can still save them. And even before with Martha, you're thinking that as well. Like, he just needs to know that he can save them. There's a sliver of hope. I can still save them. I won't lose myself. But when that radio goes out, all bets are off. He could have just as easily just given up. It could have gone either way. There are so many times in my life, particularly, and maybe even the lives of others, where I've seen people when, okay, let's say your cell phone dies. You almost lose the hope of reaching, you know, if you really need to reach your loved one, you're almost like, well, I guess I'm not communicating with that loved one. Well, borrow a friend's phone. You know, log onto your contacts, you know, your iCloud, and then if you don't know your loved one's number by heart, because that's a thing in 2018, you know, look it up on someone else's phone, call them from their phone, ask a stranger. There are things that we do when even the smallest obstacle is removed that gets us to give up. But Morgan is finally kind of moving beyond that. And you saw him fold when things got too hot, when he was faced with the possibility of not seeing Henry alive again. And when you see him start to, well, not run, but kind of like a hop skip, kind of a jump when he was trying to knock out that last walker on the bridge in that one scene, you start to understand that he's moved well beyond that. He is not in that. He's not going back. And just like John Dorie said to him on the walkie, like saying, I don't blame you, but here's the deal. You didn't kill her. You're not going to change. You're still who you are when you are. Even long after we're gone, you're going to be who you are, and you're going to help somebody else out. And yes, the radio ends right there. But those words, leaving on that note, even though it was a bitch of a note to kind of leave off on, that is enough for him to kind of go, I need to know what happens to at least my friend here. So he resolves himself to do that. Now, and so it kind of brings me back to the original point, and that's that Martha ends up unsticking Morgan unintentionally. She does like the best, I know it's a shitty thing, but she kind of does the best thing for him. She kind of forces him into a situation where he has to get over this. He needs to unstick himself for good, and I think it works here. Now, yeah, I mean, he's just facing his worst fear, losing people, right? Yeah. So, now, this is the point at which we kind of see Althea turning to the camera. Now, I was supposed to look at the notes because when you see Althea, there's two times where she kind of reaches into a bag to try to find a tape, one of the tapes she's trying to play to kind of see her life flash before her eyes. And I think there's a part of her that's looking at these videos, and I keep thinking to myself, it kind of the observation that I was making at the beginning of the episode is that she's fast-forwarding through these things. She's not looking at the details. I mean, I know there's only so much time that maybe she thinks she has, but at the same time, she's crying. She's not really focusing on a scene for that very long. She's kind of getting the idea, the impression of the video, but I think there's a part of her that when she's looking at these videos, she's getting the sense of, I could have done more. Or not that I could have done more, but I could have let myself be a part of these people. I could have lived my life more a part of these other people. Now, there may be a lot of people that really thank me for helping them here and there, as a kind of really nice person, a person that they can maybe rely on here and there. I mean, obviously she moved on, so she didn't stick around, but I think there is a part of her, and you do start to see by the end of the episode that part of her is trying to move on. Maybe she is trying to be a part of the group, but in that moment, I think she does realize that she spent all this time trying to document people, trying to treat people like subjects. Meanwhile, she could have melted herself in more, integrated herself in more for these people. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have to, make less friends, but it could mean that she kind of makes more friends, obviously. She could pick, she can move on, but at the same time keep in touch, that sort of thing. But either way, I did miss out on the opportunity to take a look at those tapes to see if there were maybe any more Easter eggs. So I apologize for that. And if I do find something, I'll definitely post it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and Submarine, the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Pluto, which is not a planet. So the next scene we basically see after Althea's, you basically get an idea that the group is kind of given up. It's kind of like, it is kind of tropey, I have to admit. Everybody's kind of giving their last words, basically, and they're kind of sad too at the same time. Althea's kind of giving her last words to the camera instead of the group, thus also further exemplifying the fact that she's the outsider. She doesn't give her last words to the group, she kind of gives it to the camera, the people that might encounter it, people that potentially will keep those tapes safe and make them matter. Sarah basically tries to get the last Walker kill count out of Wendell, and he goes, not enough. Strand's irony, just when he stopped drinking himself to death, he succeeded. So the very thing that will cure him. Luciana thought she would get a chance to make up for what they did. Basically the quest to destroy the vultures, getting Nick killed. So and almost killing Charlie in the process too. Something that she may have regretted down the road. May have. Not that I advocate for Charlie dying. I was never on that camp. But I will say one thing. Ooh, boy, oh boy, did I not understand her for a little while. And Alicia basically says to Charlie, that she thought she'd get a second chance. And then Charlie reminds her that at least they got to see the beach. She goes, yeah, you did. Not quite like that. More like a feverish and almost vomity kind of, I'd vomit, but I'm too tired kind of look. And then you hear the truck outside, and it's Morgan, and he's kicking some ass and taking out all the walkers single-handedly. And lo and behold, Morgan has the solution to everybody's problem, Augie's Ale. And just like that, Sarah says, in the next frame, that's twice Jimbo saved our keisters. Cheers, you asshole. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I always thought that Jim's character kind of went off with a whimper rather than a bang. And the idea that his beer kind of saves everybody's ass is kind of an interesting thing. Like one more little send-off for him. And also, it kind of does get people to kind of get together in camaraderie camaraderie. It seals deals. It gets people to kind of talk together and smooth things over. And that's the thing. Like, after Sarah says what she says about Jim, giving him a little l'chaim, right? You see in the next frame, Strand and Alicia, and he goes, there's a time, and this really got me. I actually started tearing up. He said, there was a time where I thought I had nobody to share a drink with anymore. And he looks at Alicia, looks down, and you start to realize, I got all these people, even Charlie, that I can drink with. And I don't have to limit this to my special friend. And maybe he was doing that all this time also because I think it was his way of, or actually really Madison's way of saying, I understand who you are. I understand that you need to be a certain way, or you needed to be a certain way in this world or prior to this world in order to survive. Meanwhile, that doesn't mean anything anymore. Strand has kind of evolved past being a certain way and only certain people getting him. Now he's got like a whole family of people who kind of just get him for who he is, the dark kind of humor that he kind of evokes every now and again, the poet that is kind of shady. But there you go. I mean, that's the thing. And you got John, the interaction with John, and you do see this thing with John and Charlie. There's this kind of father-daughter kind of routine. First, it's kind of like on the school bus, it's kind of like a I know you haven't met me before, but I'm your uncle. You come onto the scene where he's trying to tell Charlie, this drinking thing, this is a one-time thing. Like, bottom line, don't get poisoned again until you're 21. He kind of looks like this father figure. And you get the sense that, like, maybe this John June thing, this Charlie John June thing is kind of like the beginning of a family, maybe the family that she needs in this apocalypse. And I kind of want to get the idea from you guys of what you think about this idea of this kind of, the pieces kind of fit. Charlie's going to be an odd duck, but she's going to be a good odd duck. Like, who has a kid that reads? Nobody reads, But again, I guess what else is there to do in the apocalypse? She's got a lot of potential, though. If she is a heavy reader, she could be better than all of them in the end, reading books, the key to the future, maybe. But I kind of like this idea of this family getting together, this kind of odd couple, or this odd trio, let's say. And then you have Luciana looking at the neon sign for some reason, thinking of polar bears, because I get this is what you wanted. I get why this is what you wanted. And hope for the future. That's really what it comes down to. And you see Morgan and all of them basically heading back to where Morgan left Martha, and it's kind of grisly, man. She basically severed her whole arm off while she was alive to get away so that she could be a walker and hurt people. And in the process of doing all of that, or managing to eke out this one thing at the end, she managed to scratches into her own forehead strong. Now, I didn't see this at first. I didn't see this until Talking Dead, actually. And then I actually saw it in Tanya Pinkins' Instagram, what it looked like. Or at least what it started to look like before the tons of blood. But that's just something else. Like, and here's the thing. What's really important about that scene, and I'm glad they did it, is that, obviously, taking out Martha reaffirms certain principles that Morgan has. Like, basically, I'm not going to let you harm anybody else. But it shows how committed she was to being stuck, And if there's any indicator that Morgan doesn't have to go back to who he is, like, his experience of Martha's level of commitment to clinging to her own stuckness shows that there is a level deeper to what Morgan was going through. Like, it would have been one thing to go back to that level resembling Martha. But there's a level deeper, and you'll never get to that. So, and you're not even, I don't think you're even familiar with that level of stuckness. And so, I think he has a frame of reference now that, like, if it wasn't clear already when he was running back to John after Morgan's walkie gave out, I think it's very clear at this point that if there was any doubt, that he would never go back to this idea. And that's the thing, when he wipes away the words from his forehead, it's never more clear that the I lose people, I lose myself, the writing that Martha had put earlier. And but Wendell's kind of like wondering from Morgan after he ends Martha that hey, when are we going back on the road? And then that's when Morgan starts to break down a little bit emotionally, but also break down that it's not enough. He's basically saying that there are tons of people out here that if they're not savvy enough, if they're not quick on their feet enough, they could end up like Martha. And we need to take care of the people out here right now and make sure that they're okay. Now, he basically he tries to explain to the group that he's not trying to abandon them, because you start to see in their faces that oh, he's gonna leave again. Morgan shtick, he's going out on his own. But he asks for the polar bears journals from Luciana, and he wants to explain. And And in the process of going through it, he basically says, show, don't tell. And he shows polar bears were basically the idea of Clayton, the idea that Clayton got, where it came from. And he was basically a trucker for this denim factory, out of the way, basically. And it's so telling because when you're out of the way, you can have all these thoughts and you have these ideas on the road, and etc. And I think the biggest thing about the stadium, the most obvious thing, and I kind of thought this when Fear the Walking Dead came out and you saw episode 2, you realize that, like, yes, as nigh impenetrable that the stadium is, it's garish, it's accessible, it's in the middle of everything. It's what I was thinking at the time is like, oh, that's a prime target. People are going to know that exists. People are going to want to stay there, or people are going to want to take it over at the very least, or die trying. There's going to be it almost as if it attracts walkers. This is the way the sound carries, the way it presents itself. It's at least walkers, but definitely people. And the idea that, most highways and roads are going to lead to it. With the denim factory, it's the exact opposite. Yes, it has the same kind of dimensions. It has 4 walls and a ceiling and a door, and it's huge, but also has the advantage of, like, being so out of the way as to really not rouse suspicion, to not really, get passersby on the road. And it's also kind of barriered off by these natural barriers. And so there really lends a lot of promise to season 5, because you're in this new kind of arrangement where you can still kind of have, try to do the things that you're trying to do with all these journals, so you know where things are. And then now he's basically explaining to everybody that, you don't have to join with me. And then Sarah and Wendell join in and says it's not part of the deal. And he goes, nobody's forcing you to be here. But Luciana decides to basically tell him to shove it, because, what you did to Clayton led to him eventually dying. So if you want to make up for what you did, this is a really good way to start. If you want to move on after that, I mean, she doesn't say this, but probably. I mean, anything you do after that, that's fine. But, like, I think you want to be here anyway. She kind of does to Sarah and Wendell what Sarah was doing to Wendell before. She kind of just overrides them. She knows how to talk to them. Because there's a certain way you got to talk to Sarah and Wendell, and then they'll kind of respect you. I mean, if you can't protect it, it's not yours. So in her own way, Luciana's kind of protecting their relationship with each other by just claiming it. Claimers. So Alicia also chimes in. She says it's got to be more than about the boxes. It's got to be like the way Madison started it, taking people in, reaching out, going out of the way. And Strand does the smart thing of reiterating some of the earlier points, where John was saying there's nothing out there, and it's that it's desolate. There's nobody out there. How are we going to know where to look? Texas is huge. And Althea basically chimes in. She says, I was embedded with a lot of people, a lot of different groups, some of them not being in great condition, obviously not helped by Althea. Did I say Alicia? I meant Althea. And basically Althea gives them the basis of where to start looking, and they all look at her and they go, I mean, basically they all look at her really funny, because throughout the entire season, practically, they don't get her. They don't understand her. She doesn't really go out of her way to get involved. And she's shown that a couple times, but I think they took extra care to draw out the idea that she's an outsider in this episode. Maybe it's a Johnny-come-lately. Maybe you don't get that impression enough throughout the season. But at least in this episode, they did their best to kind of paint that, to draw that out, to tease that out properly. Because the way they look at her, they're like, wait, you? And then she goes, what? I got layers. Which is a good, reinforcing catchphrases. The kinds of things that Carol tends to like. Catchphrases, let's stir some beef, accessories, behaviors, certain routines, basically. If you can comic book posterize a character on The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead, it just makes them that much cooler to her, And I think this is a positive. People that start having certain sayings like "I like new people" or whatnot, it doesn't really impress her. So now in the next scene, basically you're seeing them having settled in there and heading out. It looks like they're all kind of taking the lead, trying to save people. They all have new vehicles or decked out vehicles, newly refurbished vehicles, and they're all kind of doing their thing. And then Morgan gets on the radio, and I have to say this, because when Morgan gets on the squawk box and does his little spiel, the first thing I thought of was, and it's really screwed up because I saw a commercial for the newer version of this while this was airing. I thought of the goddamn A-Team. and he goes, I don't know if any of you out there, don't know if any of you listening, but if you are, we're soldiers of fortune. No, but if you are, hang in there. We're coming for you. And it's like, if you need them, they can help. and then the cool music. But yeah, so the only other things I wanted to mention were some things from Talking Dead, which were there was a point at which they were showing kind of like best of quotes during interviews and bloopers and stuff like that, but one thing that kind of hit home for me was when Strand was trying to remember his favorite episode, Coleman Domingo, and he said his favorite one was basically the way he reflected on the last episode with all of them together, all the original cast from the first 3 seasons. Alicia, Debnam, Carey, Frank Dillane, Kim Dickens. That last episode where they were all in there together, and just the way he sighed when it came to Frank Dillane. Frank Dillane, what an unbelievable actor. And by the way, in the last season, like on Talking Dead, I remember this one story he was talking about how they were basically partying out in Mexico, and they basically went out in this random party, and they showed a picture of that night, and basically it's the two of them with their shirts off, and it just never been more clear that how close that these two people have gotten over the last 3 years, and nigh 4 years, and it was just so sad, and it kind of made me think of what Coleman has lost, and having half of the people that made it through this journey with him not be there anymore. And the other thing that I learned from Talking Dead is about the new title sequence. Now, what really screwed me up today was, and I kind of want to I want to know what your feeling is about this, because I was really mad when I saw this. Now, when I had heard about the new title sequence for The Walking Dead, I was fine, and I'm really excited about the idea. Meanwhile, I basically told Carol, and I still don't know what she thinks about it, because the one argument she made about Fear the Walking Dead was not screwing up with consistency. Like, The Walking Dead changes the visual sequences. It's in the same style, but they swap out some of the visuals. So it's still kind of sepia. It kind of flips through different scenes reflecting different characters or different settings, that sort of thing. But the way they kind of mentioned this new Season 9 of The Walking Dead title sequence is that it's kind of a revamp. And I'm really pissed off, not about that, but somebody had either The Walking Dead had released it, or somebody had leaked the actual footage of the title sequence. And what pisses me off about that is that it leaves no surprise. It leaves no room for you to be kind of excited. So it's kind of I see the first few seconds of this thing, I turn it off and I'm like, God damn it, why don't people live in their excitement? Why don't they choose to live in that moment where they don't know what's going to happen? And it really kind of bothers me, because and I'm like this old man on my lawn getting on my soapbox and then falling because I'm old. But it's this idea of just can you just deal with whatever excitement and anticipation and nervousness so that the rest of us don't have to deal with your bullshit? Because where's the surprise? I mean, it's I don't like surprise parties. You know why? Because you're just a nervous Nelly that needs to control everything. So it's kind of, and I get that. I get it. I mean, I like to control things in my life too, but I realize there's some things in my life that I just, that sometimes you just gotta leave it to fate. You gotta be pleasantly surprised. You gotta deal with life gives you. You gotta let the chips fall where they may and deal with them. And yeah, it sucks a lot of the time, but sometimes life can surprise you, and sometimes those surprises are really sweet because you had nothing to do with it. Think about it this way. You hustle and you hustle and you hustle, and then you get your reward. And that's cool. And sometimes you don't, but whatever. That's a whole other story. But isn't it a nice thing to hustle and hustle and hustle, and one of two things happens throughout the day? One, you get a reward that you didn't expect, and two, in the same day you walk home and you find $100 bill in near your car on the tire, and you're yeah, it's covered in shit, but you wipe it off and then you deal with that later. And I'm looking at every single one of you. If you saw a $100 bill and the only reason why it's sticking onto the tire of your car is because between the tire and that $100 bill is a piece of shit, I don't know one person except for maybe a millionaire that would be that wouldn't take it. You would take it. You would wash it off. And I don't know why I'm talking about this, but the whole point about this conversation is that it's a kind of a sweet thing when you get something that you get more than what you put in. And this is part of that. It's we put in the wait time. We put in the anticipation. We want to know when everybody's supposed to know, because when you know in advance, yeah, you get a haha, I know something you don't, but then you just show the whole world. I mean, it's kind of like a huge fuck you. And yes, it's the first time I've sworn tonight, but then again, I don't know if any of you guys are listening, so I don't know. I'm pissed off about it. I kind of want to know what you think, though, because... And maybe I'm crazy, and that's fine. I'm 39 years old, man. So I deal with that. But I kind of want to know what you guys think. I want to know if you guys have seen it and or have seen the whole thing. Because that's another thing. It's one thing to know that it's there, and you know that it's there because the music is the same, I think. But the other half of it is actually watching the whole thing through. And that I kind of have to fault you for if you have. Because now I'm not saying you're in the same camp of people that disseminate this sort of thing, but if you did, that's like a third layer. But if you sat through the whole thing and decided for yourself that, I'm spoiled now, I might as well watch the whole thing. It's like, well, give yourself a little present later on next time, and just stop however far in that you realize this is the title sequence or any other thing like this. Just stop for a second and just realize that. Give yourself a little surprise. Maybe you were spoiled for that for your first few seconds, but you can still watch the rest of it. So, I don't know. I kind of want to get your ideas on this. I kind of want to have a conversation about this because I have nobody else to talk about this with. So, and this is kind of way more exciting than recapping the episode. There are some hot takes, or not hot takes, there's some really good ideas that were spoken about in this episode. Things relating to Althea being the outsider. The way Morgan kind of goes through the motions throughout this episode, what it takes for him to kind of get unstuck, and what we not unexpectedly, I don't think it's a complete surprise how this ended up, but I think the way it kind of unfurls, the way we have to start to recognize certain beats in how Morgan expresses his eventual unstuckness, and also the certain markers that seal the fact that he's never going to go back. Those things are very noteworthy because you start to realize that, and this is something I said in the last episode, that if you're at the end of the episode, now turn around and look at the entire episode. Now, it's not entirely about Morgan this season of season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead, but in a way, if you had to sum it up in a few words, it kind of it would sound really shitty to the average person, in one sentence, this season is sort of a love letter entirely to Morgan, and good people, solid, long-running characters died along the way. It sounds shitty, but what you have to kind of take away from all this is that yes, it's a love letter to Morgan, but if it is a springboard for Fear the Walking Dead to continue and do incredible things in the future, I'm willing to see that through, because if Morgan is going to be a power player in Fear the Walking Dead, and then also in all the seasons that he was on, or, all the scenes and seasons that he was in The Walking Dead, being all screwed up, being faux fixed, but that he wasn't really fixed. Apparently when you get to season 8, it's kind of like, well, that didn't take. And you kind of got the thought in the back of your mind that this is not really a Zen Morgan. As much as he's okay and somewhat stable is one thing, but on the veneer, but he kind of wasn't really there. This new, real Morgan that really knows where his mind could go if left unchecked, but a Morgan that wants to be with people, that wants to be a part of the world as a real human being, not this fake, kind of, like, now when he doesn't kill people, it's for a really specific reason. It's not because somebody told him not to. It's not to prevent the monsters from coming out. He doesn't do it because it's a principle. It's something that he decided for himself, not some, the art of, was it the book he was trying to give to Nick about, I forgot not the art of war, but the art of something or other. It was that small book that he tried to give to Nick to kind of, The Art of Peace. That's right. No, nobody told me that because I can't see your chats. But he's living his own way. He's figuring out along the way. And part of that is involving himself with people. So I kind of do want to see how the series goes moving forward, because to unstick Morgan, for a series like this to unstick Morgan where The Walking Dead couldn't, is huge. And we all love Morgan. We love the idea of him. His character is so damn interesting. Has always been interesting, and his character has not been any less interesting in this season. In fact, it takes the one thing that has stayed consistent, at least from front to back, beginning to end, is been Morgan. Even before he got on, during, and then all the way at the end. Now, maybe Fear the Walking Dead itself as a show hasn't been consistent. Obviously, people call it a reboot. I don't call it a reboot, really. I think it's really just more of a direction that they're going in. A reboot implies going backward and rewriting history and recasting and then pretending certain narratives don't exist. I don't think that's true. I think it's just the direction people move in. And sometimes that direction is drastic, and maybe we need to connect with those feelings, or maybe maybe we need to go through it. Maybe we need to have a conversation about that, at least before The Walking Dead comes on. But I think that, there are some things that I wish they spent a little bit more time on. I wish the back half didn't feel more rushed, that it was maybe a little bit more developed. I really do wish that they had that they had joined the two halves of the season together in some form or fashion to kind of give it some sort of contiguousness instead of being so almost separated from each other, like almost apart from each other. I think that would have been a lot more powerful. But I'm gonna take it as it was given, because a lot of the season was kind of like a wait and see. A lot of the rest of the season, at least, and you could draw conclusions from the beginning, but in the last half it was really difficult, and as things, again, as I mentioned in previous episodes, kind of came together like a jigsaw puzzle. I'll accept it. It was good, well thought out, very creative way of kind of weaving a story, and overall it was a really good season. And honestly, like, follow, subscribe, comment, sign up for notifications so that you know when I go on, when Squawking Dead goes on again. Now, you can always go to the website squawkingdead.com and get to everything from there. But we're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and apparently now Periscope. You can get our podcast on SoundCloud, Apple Music, and then Google Play Music, and basically anywhere you can get podcasts. You can sign up for RSS feeds. And again, you fearheads, I need to know what you think. I need to have a conversation with you, because I think we need to talk about everything. We need to get it out of our system so that we can talk about maybe, because I have nobody to talk to about this. Carol refuses. So with that, everybody, I wish you a really good evening. I apologize for not being able to be more interactive with you, but I promise you that the next time this comes around, at least on Fear the Walking Dead, I will be prepared to share everything with you. And with that, I wish you a good evening.